Welcome to Revolutions Weekly, where we dive into the details of our many periodic revolutions, elections. I'm your host Alvin, and if you checked the calendar recently, you'll know that a few days ago it was May 2nd, and if you've been following what I've been doing these last 5 weeks, I keep telling you, May 2nd is a special day because that's the day all 5 of the elections that we've been talking about, all 5 of them, all their results comes out on May 2nd. So I mean, of course, it's quite a few days after May 2nd. Trust me, I've been busy. But anyways, so I'd like to do this quick episode, hopefully quick episode, just to kind of go through, all the 5 elections that we talked about, and just to see, how far were we, how far were the polls, and, what the results, the actual results, will tell us about the state and the government and just the future in general going forward. So anyways, let's get started. And by the way, guys, if you're, you need a bit more context about all this, you feel free to go back to all 5 of the episodes I recorded. It's they're all there. So just take a listen to those if you want a bit more context. But anyways, let's get to it. So the first state we have is West Bengal. So, when we were doing it, we were saying, and this is way before the actual election took place. So, for West Bengal and Assam, we were talking about purely polls. But for the 3 South Indian states, we had a bit more results. Anyways, so for West Bengal, what we have is, initially when we're looking at the polls, we predicted that, that the Trinamool Congress is slated to attain power in the state, but the BJP is slated to gain massively. So what this means is that, the Trinamool, of course, having an absolute majority, they would basically stay in power, but the BJP, with only 3 seats, they're slated to get over 104 seats in the polls. Whereas the Trinamool will, gain a slim majority of 9, basically, with the majority being, 148 to form a government, and they'll just have 9 more, so that's 157 seats. Whereas the BJP is expected to have 107 seats. So basically what this means is that, the BJP will be the main and only opposition, essentially, in the parliament. And this kind of happened, but of course, the way it happened is really interesting. So let's talk about that. So what basically happened, and this is the less interesting part of it, still really interesting though, is that Trinamool actually is still in power, surprise, surprise, but they didn't have a slim majority. In fact, they still held on to their solid majority and they actually added to it. So from their 211 before the election, now they have 213. So they basically gained 2 extra seats. I mean, if you have that many seats already, there's not really much you have to do, but, they still did it and they got 2 seats. But interestingly enough, Mamata Banerjee herself, the chief minister, the leader of the Trinamool Congress, tried to contest in Nandigram. And basically, Nandigram and the Trinamool Congress has a really, interconnected history where, the Nandigram movement was basically this big movement against a factory at the time that was being built in the region, and so that's how the Trinamool Congress gained notoriety, gained fame, and that's how they eventually got the power. So it's a very important area, and for a long time actually, it was one of her allies, a guy with the name of Subhendru Adhikari, who actually held on to this seat for the Trinamool Congress, but just last year he defected to the BJP. So of course, he wants to stay in the seat, but this time he's contesting for the BJP, whereas to contest the seat to keep it for the Trinamool and just to get brownie points, Mamata Banerjee decided to contest this seat as well, but she lost by a slim margin. So I think it was only 1,000 votes or something like that. So because of that, Subhendru Adhikari retained his seat, but he retained it for the BJP. So that's one interesting thing that happened. Other than that, sweeping victory for the Trinamool Congress. But in the next point, the BJP, like I said, they were slated to get 107, so they underperformed and they got 77. This is still really good though, because they went from 30 to 77, so they gained 74 seats essentially. And you might think, well, if the Trinamool still has a solid majority and the BJP gained 77 seats, where did they get it from? Now this is the really interesting part. So, so far I keep saying Trinamool BJP, but, it seems like we're forgetting 2 very big players in the state. Congress, Indian National Congress, and the Left Front with the CPIM. And the CPIM, they held Bengal for 30 years before 2011. They lost power only 10 years ago. Well, you might be wondering, well, how many seats do they have? 0. Both of them won no elections. None of the seats. So initially they had 67 seats, I believe, together. Something like that. But basically what the BJP did is they literally just took all of their seats. Just all of it. So it's so if you're wondering where the BJP gained all these seats, well, it must be because the Trinamool won all of their seats. Well, then it must be from Congress and the Left Front, which is honestly really embarrassing for both of them because, well, for the communists, they just had the state, like a few years ago, and for Congress, it's just like another slap in the face in their decline overall nationally. So, but their coalition, the Mahajot, did win 1 seat. And that 1 seat is by the Indian Secular Front, which is like a Muslim party, something like that. So in this one district, there's a significant Muslim majority, and that's the 1 seat that the coalition won. Honestly, very embarrassing, and I'm not sure how they're going to be able to recover from this, as it and as it seems now, BJP is slated to be the main opposition, and the only 2 player in town is Trinamool and BJP at this point. So I'm not sure what's going to happen there. They could surprise me. I don't know. We still have 5 years. Let's see what happens. And the other seats, there's 3 vacant seats, probably a recount, and there's 1 independent seat. Now, anyways, moving on. Now we're going to be talking about Assam. So before the election happened, our polls said, BJP with power in the state, they slated to retain power, albeit in a slimmer majority. So we're talking about 57 versus 67. So it's within 10 seats. Now I said this was important because like the Bodoland region, which had 11 seats, could determine, who actually wins the government. So that didn't really happen, and I'll tell you why in a bit. So here are the results. So basically the result says BJP is slated to retain power, but their coalition seats actually declined by 11. So it's not as big of a decline as the polls predicted, but it's still a pretty significant decline. So they lost 11 seats, basically. They went from 86 to 75. Whereas Congress, in their last go-around, they went on their own and they only gained 24. Since then, they've entered a coalition, and now they've been able to win 50 seats. So, so it's not 57-67, it's 75-50. Still, with the BJP in the upper hand. And with the Bodoland vote, what essentially happened is it became a non-factor simply because it was split. It was literally split. So when I said, like the United People's Party Liberal, the UPPL and the Bodoland People Front, like these 2 parties, they were supposed to duke it out, with the Bodoland People Front initially being dominant in the region. Now what we see is a split. So the UPPL gained 6 and the BPF gained 5 only. So you see what I mean? So it's basically, it didn't really ultimately factor into, like who ultimately won or lost because it was split. So it's just like a normal thing basically. So, but with the decline in BJP and the gain in Congress, I would not rule out a possible Congress victory in the future if they stopped sucking and actually started like doing things properly, because I think it's like one of the biggest downfalls in, for the Congress in Assam is like, just like dynasticism, basically. So I think there was the old chief minister, and like now, who's the current leader of the Congress party in Assam is his son, basically, something like that. And in fact, they might also win as well because, there's actually a rift in the BJP right now. So of course, like the chief minister candidate and the leader of the BJP in Assam is the guy by the name of Sabrananda Sonowal. But, the big reason BJP was able to win is because this other guy named Himanta Biswa Sarma, he basically defected from Congress, and he's basically like, imagine what Amit Shah is to Modi, where Amit Shah, was able to like craft this effective campaign for the BJP nationally. Now, Himanta Biswa Sarma was basically able to do the same thing for Congress for years. That's why Congress used to dominate the state. But basically, he defected to BJP because, he didn't feel heard. I think it's like there was even one story where he went to Delhi to talk to Rahul Gandhi about, the Congress's chances in the election. and Rahul Gandhi was just there playing with his dog. So basically, like he felt slighted, he felt offended by the fact that that they were just gonna pick like the old guy's son and not him, and basically he felt slighted over that, and so he defected to the BJP. He strategized for the BJP, and that's how the BJP won the state. So, and people like him instead of Sonowal usually. So it'll be interesting to see in the coming years if if Himanta Biswa Sarma actually stays in the BJP, or or if he might even like be the chief minister in this upcoming government. We'll just have to see. But there's a rift there, and that could be exploited by the Congress, or if the Congress just like actually gets better at winning elections, they could win as well, because the trends show that they might have a chance. Moving on, the third state we have is Tamil Nadu. So we're getting to the elections, the ones that we're talking about here, like the South Indian ones. When I was talking about these technically already happened. They were just still counting the results. Anyways, so for Tamil Nadu, the polls showed the DMK, part of this Secular Progressive Alliance, is slated to take power. So in the Secular Progressive Alliance, we have the DMK, Congress, couple of left front parties, yada yada yada. So anyways, they're slated to take power. And what does the result shows? Yes, they did. Basically, I mean, it's like this is out of all the ones that I'm talking about here, is like this is the one that's like just really straightforward. Yes, the DMK took power. It was an absolute majority. It's like even on DMK on its own gained an absolute majority, but with the coalition partners, the majority is even bigger. So the AIA-DMK, people thought they were gonna really underperform. I guess like they didn't. They kind of held on a little bit, but they only have like 66 seats, and whereas the DMK has like 117. So I mean, in Tamil Nadu, this is perfectly normal. Don't get me wrong. So like the fact that the AIA-DMK didn't get absolutely decimated, I guess that's a success on the part of Edipati Palaswamy. I guess like to hold on to like what was left of like at the time what people thought was a fracturing party after the death of Jayalalitha. So basically, he didn't lose as much. And, but then like the big reason he lost, people would say, is actually because the BJP, who the AIA-DMK allied with, actually ended up being a big liability. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, like I said in the episode itself, the people of Tamil Nadu don't exactly like BJP to begin with. So with the AIA-DMK deliberately and openly allying with the BJP, it's, it didn't look good for them, and I think ultimately the DMK was able to gain massively from this. It was basically a smear campaign that wrote itself. So they basically shot themselves in the foot by allying with the BJP. But even though I make this point about how the BJP is hated in Tamil Nadu and stuff, the BJP still managed to gain 3 seats. So now they have about 4 seats. So even though the AIA-DMK got decimated, well, the BJP was still able to gain something out of it. So now they have 4 seats. Who knows? Maybe they might gain more in the future. I doubt it. It'll be anytime soon, but we'll just have to see. Anything can happen. And the next state we're going to be talking about is Kerala. Now with Kerala, again, the election already happened when we were talking about it. They were just counting. So here are the polls. So the polls, said that the CPIM, as part of the Left Democratic Front, is slated to take power again. Now this was interesting at the time because for 40 years, Kerala has had an anti-incumbency trend. And Tamil Nadu actually, I just learned recently, actually had an anti-incumbency trend for decades. It was only in 2016, after, with Jayalalitha, basically, that they were able to overcome the anti-incumbency trend. So it was a very recent thing in Tamil Nadu. Now in Kerala, it was a longer anti-incumbency trend with, over 40 years where there's no incumbent, basically. So it was between Congress and the CPIM, just flip-flopping between the two. And basically what the poll shows is that the CPIM is going to break this trend, which is interesting because, it hasn't been broken for 40 years, so like why now? So that's what was interesting. And pretty straightforward, the results show CPIM broke the trend and they actually gained seats. So they gained 8 seats. So now they have about 99. Whereas the Congress is honestly, it's a pretty bad performance where it's like, they lost 6 seats, so they went from 47 to 41. And well, that just goes to show you, that's basically what happens when you don't have an organized election strategy. Even though the anti-incumbency would have favored you, but if you can't get your ish together well, then you don't have a winning strategy. Well, then, at that point, it's just like you can't just take it for granted. That's what I'm saying basically. So even though it's anti-incumbency consistently in these southern states, that doesn't mean you will always win just because you're not the incumbent. You have to actually propose something good. You know what I mean? Anyways, so and then like the BJP had one seat, and this is like a really big thing at the time because it was the BJP's one of their first entries into the deep south. Well, they lost that one seat to the CPIM. So, so then it was kind of like, it was this thing that people were freaking out about, and it just kind of died in a whimper. So, is it the end of the BJP in Kerala? Is it the end of the BJP in South India? The deep south, I mean. Well, we'll just have to see. And, definitely big props to, Pinarayi Vijayan for actually being able to buck the anti-incumbency trend. Because, like, even though the Congress messed up big time in this election, he, like, if the CPIM, if the LDF was not good, well, they wouldn't probably win either. So, props to him for that. And it's also worth noting that, Kerala, because of Pinarayi Vijayan's efforts, is essentially the last stronghold for the CPIM all over India. Because, every other state, they basically are barely relevant, except maybe Tripura, where they're the main opposition, but that's a really small state. And in West Bengal, where, they used to be really dominant, they're basically decimated. They have 0 seats currently there. So, maybe perhaps the CPIM could, look at their victories in Kerala and actually use it as a national model somehow. Anyways, moving on, now we're going to be talking about a union territory known as Pondicherry. Now remember, this is like my last episode before this one. So the polls show for this one, the AINRC, the All India and Ragasami Congress, as part of the NDA with the BJP, is slated to gain power again. Now, of course, they had power before the last election, so they're basically just going to get it again. So what we're looking at is a breakdown of like 21 seats versus 9. So that's what's being more or less expected to happen. So they technically underperformed, but it's still interesting what actually happened. So the AINRC basically, they did gain power. That's basically what the results is. They gained 2 seats, so they went from 8 to 10. And the BJP, now here's the really interesting thing, the BJP initially only had 3 nominated seats. Now they have 6 legitimate seats. So they basically gained 6 seats. So now what we're looking at is a government form of 16 MLAs, which is a slim majority, don't get me wrong, but it's still really, really interesting that, the BJP was able to win big. And I think out of all the states in the South, this is like the BJP's biggest win this election. And, plus, and if we add the 3 nominated MLAs from the center, well, then that makes them 19. So, that'll be interesting to see as well. Now, for the UPA, this is where it becomes more interesting. The United Progressive Alliance, Congress's alliance. And, just a reminder, Congress had just been in power. So, here's what happened. They basically lost 13 seats. I know, embarrassing. So they went from 15, to be in power you need 16. So they basically have like 19 or something. It was a really nice majority, solid majority. So they had 15 on their own, and they lost 13 of those. So now they're literally down to 2. I know it's horrible. And then, but the DMK, their main partner, actually gained 4 seats. So they went from 2 to 6. So basically the total for the UPA is only 9, but literally within one election, the DMK became the principal partner in the coalition. So it was Congress initially calling the shots, now it's the DMK. So going forward, I guarantee you it might be possible that the DMK might be the one pushing for a chief minister candidate. They might be the one getting more of the seat share because, well, they have it right now. Unless, they have an agreement pre-made, whatever. But I could definitely see the DMK playing a bigger role in Pondicherry politics, with just these results alone. And, for the BJP's victory, let's not, forget that, it was basically due to, loads of, some Congress people defecting to the BJP that actually they were able to, gain this much to begin with. So, most notably, N. Namasivayam, basically, who was, a really significant minister in the previous UPA government. He basically defected to the BJP, ran for BJP, and he won. So he was also a leader there in the Pondicherry BJP party. So maybe going forward, he might be more ambitious. He might want to be chief minister. We'll just have to see. It's kind of like a AINOC right now. Like of course Anwar Goswami dominating right now, but the BJP could like make a ploy for power. The DMK, now being the principal partner, could also like make a run for it, make a go for it, and now the Congress being decimated. They could try and they could regain themselves, but I don't know. So it's like it's interesting. You have two coalitions, but it feels more of like a four-way race going forward. We'll just have to see. So, anyways, that's all 5 elections that we talked about. And these are all the results. So it's interesting. Like what actually happened. Like basically the polls got it right, but not 100%. And the actual dynamics of it is still interesting to look at nevertheless. In terms of like what will happen going forward, with coalition building and things like that. And like, like just with like the general plan of Congress and BJP nationally as well. Anyways, so it's like, I'm probably not going to touch India for a while. Maybe like I'm definitely going to talk about them again in 2022 because there's a lot of good elections there as well. But, it's like for a while, like I guess this is going to be it for Indian elections. But it's definitely been a really interesting 5 weeks to like just be able to cover all this. And later in the week, I'm actually going to be releasing another episode. So it's going to be a special 2-episode week. I think it's like, recently I just like heard, like the elections, there was a couple of elections in the UK, with like Scotland and Wales. So, that'll give us a chance to dive into, well, first of all, Europe, and just second of all, just like, like regional British politics. So I'll see you for that. Be sure to follow the podcast if you're on Spotify, and if you're on YouTube, comment, like, and subscribe.